Pokemon games aren't the most difficult games in the world. This lack of difficulty has been a common criticism of Pokemon in recent years, and while I agree to some extent, I think it's nearly impossible to make the games more difficult for two reasons. First off, Game Freak most likely wants players to be able to breeze through the games and use the post-game to prepare competitive teams for VGC. This represents a small fraction of the Pokemon community, but also a growing one. Alternatively, Pokemon games are simple because, let's be honest here, no matter what type of gym leader, Elite Four member, champion, or evil team leader uses, you'll most likely have Pokemon with type advantages over them in your party or in your PC. So all you need to do is make sure you catch a Pokemon with type advantages over those trainers. Want to take on Bugsy with no trouble? Just pick Cynical as your starter. Look at him, he's an adorable little arsonist. Gardenia causing your Prinplup trouble? Staravia is an excellent Pokemon and can solo carry that gym. Ultra Necrozma has you scratching your head for answers? Not sure how to deal with Sydney? Honestly, that's your own fault. Sydney is kinda weak. But what happens when an early game gym leader doesn't have a good answer into their team? What if there was a fight where the gym leader uses a strong Pokemon with good moves and where there's no great answers to counter their ace Pokemon? In this case, you'd see an entire generation of Pokemon trainers end up with some Pokemon-induced trauma. I'm talking, of course, about everyone's least favorite crybaby in the Pokemon series, Whitney. Look, I'm not trying to say that beating Whitney is impossible. Nothing in Pokemon is that difficult, not even Ultra Necrozma. But we have to admit that Whitney is a bit of an outlier compared to other gym leaders, as battling her Miltank can actually be a bit of a challenge if your team isn't ready for it. And yes, I'm of course going to explain why I believe that Miltank is the issue. In Gold, Silver, and Crystal, Whitney's Miltank is at level 20, still a fairly low early game level. And in Heart Gold Soul Silver, her Miltank is at level 19 instead. But this causes an issue for the player. Miltank, being a Pokemon without an evolution chain, has much higher base stats than the Pokemon you can catch at this point will have. Miltank has a base stat total of 490, whereas your starter will have a stat total of 405. So already, we can see that Miltank is going to be stronger than the Pokemon you'll have in your party. But Proto, I hear you typing in the comments as I'm writing this script. You said that Roserade is easy to deal with in Sinnoh, but Roserade is a fully evolved Pokemon with a base stat total of 515. It's even stronger than Miltank. And I'll admit that, yes, Roserade is technically stronger. However, let's analyze what's different in these two cases. First off, there's the fact that despite Roserade's higher base stat total, its only high stats are its speed and special stats. Meanwhile, Roserade has relatively low HP and defense stats of 60 and 65 respectively, making it pretty frail on the physical spectrum. So by using physical attackers like Monferno or Staravia, you can hit Roserade on its weaker defense stat, giving you a way of handling Roserade. On the other hand, Miltank has much better defensive stats than Roserade, with a base HP of 95, a base defense of 105, and base special defense of 70. Thanks to its higher defensive stats, Miltank is harder to take down. Due to its higher base defense, you're better off using special moves against Miltank, whose base 70 special defense is barely higher than Roserade's base 65 defense. However, it's important to point out that Miltank's special bulk is actually a lot higher than we think after comparing it to Roserade's defense, because of Miltank's high HP stat. So no matter what kind of attacks you use, Miltank does have enough bulk to take hits pretty well. But Proto, I hear you once again typing away furiously. You said to use Monferno and Staravia against Roserade because they hit super effectively. Just use fighting type moves to hit Miltank with its weakness. And I will be getting into that one, but let's take a look at Miltank's other stats first. One thing at a time, my dear viewer, we can't rush a good explanation. Now, remember how I mentioned Roserade having 3 high stats and 3 relatively low stats? Roserade has low HP and defense, as well as a low attack stat, which it doesn't use anyways. Miltank also has a stat that's even lower than any of Roserade's, that being its special attack, which Miltank doesn't use. But if Miltank has high defenses, does it have low attack and speed to compensate? Well, no, not at all. Miltank has a base attack stat of 80, which is higher than the attack stats of the previously mentioned Monferno and Staravia, so it'll hit pretty hard with its move pool, especially since most of the Pokemon you can obtain up to that point in the game have a lower defense stat than that. And for some reason unknown by even Arceus itself, Miltank was blessed with a base speed stat of 100, making it not only bulky, but also fast. And this speed unfortunately works very well with Miltank's move pool, which I'll explain now. But Proto, you type once more, what about using fighting types? Please stop interrupting, I'll get to that soon. But like I said, Miltank's high speed is perfect for its move pool. Miltank's moves are Stomp, Attract, Milk Drink, and of course the infamous Rollout. And if you thought I'd be talking about Rollout here, then you're absolutely wrong. The biggest threat to your team isn't actually Rollout. Rather, the issue here is Stomp. Not only is this a move that gets same type attack bonus, but it's also a move that has a chance to cause your Pokemon to flinch. So that high speed stat means that it's likely for Whitney's Miltank to outspeed you and end up flinching your Pokemon with Stomp. Good luck using slow Pokemon like Geodude to resist both of Miltank's moves, since it's likely that Miltank will cause a few flinches during the battle. But that's fine, right? Just bait the rollout, then switch into a Pokemon like Geodude that resists it and whittle Miltank down. That's a good plan, except it kind of isn't thanks to Milk Drink. Unfortunately, if you try doing damage to Miltank slowly over time, it can end up healing itself back up to high HP with Milk Drink, ultimately wasting a lot of your time in the process. And as if that wasn't all bad enough, Miltank has access to Attract, which means that any male Pokemon you've caught might not even be useful in the battle, very likely including your starter Pokemon. But Proto, I hear for the last time, and yeah, I get it. Use super effective moves against the gym and you'll have no problems. Excellent logic for sure, and it works in most circumstances. But not here. For most gyms, Pokemon with type advantages are readily available somewhere in the game before you get to those gyms, but this isn't the case for Whitney's gym. Well, there are 2 fighting type Pokemon available for you to catch by this point, but man, are they not set up to counter Whitney. First off, we have Heracross. Now, Heracross is actually an incredible Pokemon, and I do recommend trying it out when playing Gold, Silver, or Crystal. The problem is that Heracross is a fighting type Pokemon with no fighting type moves. The only fighting move it can learn in Gold, Silver, Crystal is Rock Smash, which it learns by TM, and can't be obtained until after you've beaten Whitney. The other issue is that Heracross's bug typing means that it doesn't even resist Rollout, so unfortunately, Heracross isn't the best answer into Whitney. Of course, you could always try Muscle, a Machop that can be obtained by trade in the Celadon department store. It is possible for Muscle to have the move Karate Chop before you fight Whitney, but that's all Muscle has going for it. As it turns out, Muscle will always be a female, and I regret to inform you all that the Gen 2 games were inherently a bit sexist. See, genders in Generation 2 games were determined by 2 things: the female to male ratio for a species of Pokemon, and the attack DVs of that Pokemon. For anyone that has never heard the term DV before, and I can't blame you if you haven't, DVs are the precursor to present day IVs, a hidden value that determines how high an individual Pokemon's stats are. Basically, a Pokemon is generated as being female if its attack DV value is low, depending on the female to male ratio for its species. Essentially, if a species has a low female to male ratio, the females would always have a low attack DV. Machop, for example, has a 1:3 female to male ratio. This means that only 25% of Machop are female, and as a result, female Machops have the lowest 25% attack DV numbers, in this case a number from 0 to 3 out of 15. And so, although you can use Muscle to battle Whitney, it's a really weak Pokemon that in my opinion isn't even worth trading for, seeing as you'll get access to your own Machops as soon as you get to Mount Mortar, an area you can literally go to immediately after beating Whitney and catching Sudowoodo. So if fighting types don't counter Miltank, what does counter it? Well, the answer is nothing. Nothing actually counters Miltank. There is no single Pokemon in the game that will guarantee a win against it. What you can have instead of a counter to Miltank is checks to Miltank. One such check could be a Pokemon such as Geodude, Phanpy, or Sandshrew with the move Mudslap. These Pokemon resist Rollout, so they can tank a few hits while using Mudslap to lower Miltank's accuracy. But there's only one Pokemon in particular that I personally believe to be the best possible check to Whitney's Miltank, and it's hiding in tree branches not too far from Goldenrod. Execute. Execute can be found by headbutting trees on Route 34 in Gold or Silver, or in the Ilex Forest in Crystal. And as it turns out, Execute has all the tools it needs to become an effective check to Whitney's Miltank, with its only real downside being its slow speed, making it susceptible to stomp flinches. For starters, Execute has a base defense stat of 80. Although not the best stat, it's still good enough to let Execute survive a few hits, giving it the time it needs to set itself up for victory. In addition, Execute gets access to exactly the moves that it needs to keep both itself and its teammates alive against Miltank. When you first catch an Execute, it'll already have Reflect, which halves damage from physical moves for 5 turns. Execute also has good longevity thanks to Leech Seed, which it learns at level 13. Leech Seed helps both Execute and its teammates by giving them passive healing, and it's really effective against Miltank due to its high HP stat. And to round out the supportive moves, Execute also has Hypnosis when it's captured. It may not be accurate, but stopping rollout from ramping up by putting Miltank to sleep is always a good thing. But remember, Miltank is good against chip damage since it has Milk Drink to heal itself. Luckily, Execute's last move is an offensive option. Execute learns the move Confusion at level 19, and although it won't be doing massive damage to Miltank, it'll do enough since it hits Miltank on its weaker special defense. Plus, there's also the chance of Confusion causing its namesake, giving you another potential way of slowing down that rolling cow. Now, keep this in mind, I didn't say that Execute is a counter. It has the tools to do well against Miltank, and can also set up its teammates for victory with the combination of Reflect and Leech Seed. There's also still the possibility of missing Hypnosis or Leech Seed, getting hit by a critical hit, or getting flinched by Stomp. At the end of the day, this is still a Pokemon game, and even the perfect game plan can be shattered by some bad RNG. But overall, Execute is an excellent option for helping you take on Whitney in Gold, Silver, and Crystal. So, as it turns out, we didn't actually need to deal with the post-Whitney trauma that affected so many children in the early 2000s, myself included. Though, let's be real here. When we were kids, our only strategy in Pokemon was to overlevel our starter and use 4 attacking moves to brute force our way through everything. And hey, it worked when we were kids, so I guess it could still work now as well. But even so, I genuinely think that the battle against Whitney is one of the very few difficult battles in the entire Pokemon series, albeit one that you can get through easily enough if you have the right tools. But what do you think about Whitney? Do you hate her as much as I do thanks to bad childhood experiences? Or do you think she's not anywhere near as bad as people claim her to be? Leave your thoughts on this battle in the comments below, or let me know what battle in the series you think is more difficult than this one. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to my channel for some more content. I've been doing Nuzlockes of each generation of Pokemon using only Pokemon that were introduced in that generation, which you can find linked in the description below. I also make a lot of Mega Man Battle Arc content, so if you're interested in that series, you should definitely check out those videos. And as always, thanks for watching.